The second edition of the Challenge Cup is upon us. A nice little curtain raiser for the new NWSL season. It's starting on April 9th with a big final on May the 8th. That's my birthday, but it's not all about me. Alexis Nunes here alongside Julie Foudy and Kathleen McNamee. We're going to tell you pretty much everything to look forward to as we lead into the new NWSL season, as well as some changes that we can expect in this second edition of the Challenge Cup. Kathleen, I suppose let's just start with you right there. We had the inaugural Challenge Cup last year in 2020. It was kind of still in the height of the COVID pandemic. So of course it was all about that bubble life. Now certain things have changed, no more bubble life, and a bit of a change in the format. So tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, so obviously last season, it was the first professional league to come back in the US, which was an incredible feat for the NWSL. They brought new sponsorship on board. They bubbled everyone in Utah. This year, slightly different. They have two conferences. So there's an East Division and a West Division with the teams split into each, and each will play games in that, and then the top two from each conference will then go on to play the final, as you said, on May 8th. So a little bit different, a little bit more travel involved. It's going to be slightly more difficult to contain the virus maybe than last year when everyone was in the one place, and they did an excellent job at that. There was no cases throughout the whole tournament, which was an unbelievable feat again from them. So it'll be interesting to see how it handles, but I think it'll be a good warm-up for the regular season and to see how it goes.
And Julie, what about for you? Because as Kathleen said, it's now been split East Coast, West Coast, which so many sports in the US are split, so it kind of makes sense. But there still is a traveling element and no bubble life. So any concerns from you there?
No, because I guarantee you ask any players, they're like, no more bubble life. Let's go. No more time together. They've already had 2 months in preseason. They just want to play games. They want some sense of normalcy. I mean, these players are dying to play games. And this has been a very long preseason, as they all have been talking about. So they're like, let's go.
They're absolutely raring to go a bit. And I mean, I think all of us are tired of bubble life. So I can only imagine them as well. They're only human after all, right? So moving on now, I suppose we can look at probably the big headline, and that's the fact that the scheduling isn't really the most wonderful scheduling, given the fact that it does hit smack dab in the opening week for the Challenge Cup with some internationals that are going on. Some big names to miss, Kathleen. Which ones probably will be reeling from this a lot more than others?
I think there's a few different. There's some who are missing in like very key positions, you know, like Houston Dash, you're missing a goalkeeper. Like, how are you going to fill that? But I think one of the main things with this is it'll be really interesting to see how some of the smaller teams, the ones that don't have maybe as many international players, fare on the first weekend. Kind of gives them an opportunity to get a foot in the door. Maybe teams like Racing Louisville, who are just coming in, this is their first season. I'm really interested to see how they deal with it, and if it gives them an opportunity to maybe get some points on the board, get confidence, and keep going through to the next rounds.
And Julie, what about you? Who are going to be the biggest misses who might be sweating it a bit, at least for the first week?
Well, I actually think, you know, one of the things that all these teams are going to have to get used to this year, especially because there's going to be no break, it looks like, for the Olympics. And as we saw in 2019, pre-COVID, right? The teams that dealt the best with missing international stars, it's an Olympic year. There are going to be lots of stars missing. I think I look at a team like Orlando, which hasn't been able to deal with that. You saw in 2019 with all the top stars they had on that team, so many were missing because of that World Cup, right? How they deal with some of their big stars missing during these windows, and especially during the Olympics, is going to be huge for them this year, I think. So I'll be watching for them. And you have a lot of stars who are still trying to, with a roster of 18 at the Olympics, are still trying. I mean, you could still make the argument Carly Lloyd needs to still sell that she can be a valuable player for the United States come 2021 in the summer in the Olympics. So she's gonna be ready to go with the U.S. team.
All right. Well, the U.S. women's national team, of course, have an international friendly against Sweden coming up. So we'll get to that in a bit. But now in terms of overall, because we know at the Challenge Cup last year, it was supposed to be a one-off. Now it's good to see it come back. Like I said, nice little curtain raiser for the NWSL. So who's really got the most to gain from this? And as you know, Julie pointed out as just now, Kathleen, usually when you are missing some of the big stars, it also leaves an opportunity for some of the other fringe players to probably make a name for themselves, especially with the Olympics in mind.
Completely. And I think it's going to be a really interesting season, not just for the people that we see come up through the draft this year, but also those who came through last year, because the 2020 class weren't really given an opportunity to shine in the way that they maybe would have in a normal season, because matches were all over the place, injuries were all over the place. They've had a really long preseason into this. And there's some of the coaches have said in some ways this was almost a better start to their professional careers, because instead of being thrown in the deep end, you had that slow build up of last year and then this slightly longer preseason this year. So I'm really interested to see how they do. But I'm also really interested as well as to how the league gains from all this, because I think it's actually the thing that will probably benefit the most if this goes well. We saw how beneficial this cup was to them last year. We've heard it so much from players who go across to Europe, how much they love the fact that there are so many different competitions that you can compete in. So I think this is a really exciting opportunity for the league itself to kind of sell itself a little bit more, maybe draw back some of those players that did leave and go over to Europe, and just put a bit more excitement into the whole season.
That's true. And Julie, hit me with some names here, because as Kathleen said, some players did, go over to Europe, some big name players as well, but it still leaves, a stage for some others to shine. In terms of ones to watch, who are you looking out for?
I want to see Sophia Smith, right? To Kathleen's point, you had that 2020 draft class who didn't hardly get any time. And so this is a player who we've seen what she could do with the youth national team. We've seen what she could do at Stanford, although she left Stanford early. She has tons of upside, is trying to get into that top 18 with the national team right now, the U.S. team. So how she does at Portland is something that I will be watching for. I would love to see how Emily Fox does, Brianna Pinto, some of these young kids that are coming through the draft that Emily Fox and Pinto, of course, play for University of North Carolina. They're finishing out those seasons and will gather with the teams. But these are these young kids who are breaking through, and how they then break through, as we've seen them do on the youth national team, can that mean that catapults them to the full national team? So those three in particular, I'm excited to see and how they do.
Well, you mentioned Emily Fox and Brianna Pinto, Kathleen, but of course, just looking through your notes that we were discussing before this, you have a certain name in there that definitely stands out, and that's the Washington Spirit's Trinity Rodman. I know she's close to your heart there from getting a chance to speak with her as well. What do you want to see from her, or what kind of opportunity do you want to see her grab, at least either in the Challenge Cup or this coming season?
I think she just really needs to prove that she can play at this level. Obviously, she's so different compared to a lot of the rookies that we see come through, and the fact that she never played at a college level. So to the fans, to of everyone else, to the opposition, no one really knows what to expect from her. And I think that's really exciting. When as you said, I interviewed her whenever she was drafted, and I talked to her coaches, both those at Washington State and then people who had been with her since she was like a little kid. And they kept saying she's the complete package. She has the speed, she has the skills, she just needs to work on that accuracy, that fine tuning. And whenever you ask her who's the sort of player that you compare yourself to, or who do you look up to, she names the likes of Kristen Press, which obviously for the US, if you could get another Kristen Press, you'd be very, very happy. So I think for her, especially coming into this challenge, for her, it's going to be proving that she deserves a spot on that team, that she is as good as what everyone has said. And that's a lot of pressure on young shoulders. So maybe if she doesn't show it this season, it doesn't mean it's not there. But I think getting that game time up, showing that she has the potential, that is going to be so important for her this season.
I think any team would take another Kristen Press, that's for sure. All right, well, let's get straight into it now. In terms of the fixtures, you have North Carolina Courage up against Washington Spirit, Racing Louisville up against Orlando Pride, the defending champs Houston Dash up against Chicago Red Stars, and the Portland Thorns against Kansas City. Julie, which matchup sticks out to you for this opening week?
Well, the obvious would be the title game of the Challenge Cup last year, Houston-Chicago, but I'm not going to say that. I'm actually looking forward to the North Carolina-Washington matchup, because these two teams have had such different trajectories over the last few years. We've watched just North Carolina dominate, winning both in 18 and 19 pre-COVID. And they didn't, of course, win the Challenge Cup in 2020. And Washington, on the other hand, hasn't made it to the playoffs in since 2016. And we've seen all the changes. Rose Lavelle no longer at Washington. Mal Pugh, of course, gone. Kelly O'Hara is in. Emily Sonnen is now in. They've made some big draft moves. Ashley Sanchez, one of them. So I am very excited to see where they're at and what they're doing with all the changes they made, and to see North Carolina without Sam Mewis, without Abby Dahlkemper, without Crystal Dunn, who's now at Portland. So it's a new North Carolina team, and can they keep that domination that they've had for the last few years?
Kathleen, what about you? Are you going to go with the Dash clash with Chicago, or have you got another one from left field?
I agree that is definitely, everyone is curious to see how the two of them do, but I also, to kind of harp back to something that Julie said earlier, I'm really curious about the Orlando Pride Racing Louisville matchup, because I just think Orlando Pride have so much to prove. They have all these big names, they have all these amazing players, but they haven't really reached their full potential. And I think Racing Louisville coming in, first year expansion team, they will want to prove things. They have Christy Hawley at the helm, who the fellow Irishman. He has worked with the US women's national team. You know, he has a lot of experience in the women's game, and I'm really curious to see how he sets that team up, especially considering he maybe doesn't have some of the big names that he wants. You know, they acquired rights for the likes of Kristen Press, Tobin Heath, but they're all here. Caitlin Fjord, again, they're all in England playing in the WSL. So like, how is he going to work with the team that he has in front of him? I'm really curious about that. And I think the big names in Orlando Pride, there's some of them that will be looking to go towards the Olympics, but also just, I think, reclaim a bit of, forgive the pun, pride in the whole thing, because they haven't shown their capabilities in the last few seasons and have probably disappointed a lot of fans. So that's the one I'm looking forward to.
Well, thank you very much for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming, premium content, and let's not forget as well, ESPN FC 7 days a week. Subscribe to ESPN Plus.